Between the Rows podcast is brought to you by Glacier FarmMedia and sponsored by FCC Ag Expert.
Hey, do you know what's new and improved? Ag Expert software.
What's that?
Ag Expert? It's field and accounting software designed for Canadian agriculture.
No, that's Sparkle Sound.
When I say Ag Expert?
Yeah, that.
Well, Ag Expert Field helps you manage your farm. And Ag Expert Accounting is the accounting software in Canadian agriculture. But it's so new and improved, it still has that sparkle to it.
Mm-hmm. Can I use it on my phone?
Of course, it's built for modern agriculture. Try it for free at agexpert.ca.
Welcome to Between the Rows, where you get to hear the stories behind the stories in Canada's leading farm publications.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Between the Rows. I'm your host this week, Manitoba Co-operator Editor Gord Gilmour. It's an action-packed lineup this week as we learn about mysterious seed packets from China, a superweed that's on the march across the prairies, and all about canola's backdoor to China. But first, here's Farmtario editor John Gregg. He joins us to tell us about a controversial release of farmer information by the Ontario provincial government. John, thanks for being here today.
No problem, Gord.
So, exactly what has kicked off this whole fuss?
So about a month or so ago, the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs sent about 400 to 500 letters to farmers saying that someone had put in a Freedom of Information request to the ministry to get all of the, in Ontario you have to be a registered farm business in order to qualify for programs, tax rebates, all that kind of stuff. And the requester wanted all the farm business registration numbers and names of the farms, which you could imagine created a bit of concern in the case of farmers.
So, what do we know about who requested this and why they want the information? I've literally never heard of anything like this before.
So we don't know, and that's been a real frustration for farmers. Farm groups found out today, I believe, that the OMAFRA will be giving out names. They're kind of splitting down the middle. They're not going to give out the registration numbers, but they're going to give the requester the names of all the farms that are registered as farms in Ontario. So there's a lot of concern that we don't know who is making the request. That just creates a lot of anxiety and theories. Of course, the concern is that it could be a anti-farming organization or an animal rights group that could want that information in order to target farms. Certainly, that has occurred in the past, but we just don't know, and that's what it really angers some of the farmers. Is that if their personal information gets released, why can't we at least know who is requesting their personal information?
So then, just to clarify, OMAFRA keeps records of every farm in the province?
Anyone that wants to be registered as a farm in order to qualify for many programs, including the farm tax rebate, which we have in Ontario, which means farms are taxed at 25% of the residential rate of your local municipality, which is which basically means every farm registers for that because it's just a financial imperative.
So what's the reaction of farm groups been then to this?
So they've been active on this right from the first time it came out, and they've encouraged people to say no, they don't want it released. And today the farm groups are really unhappy when the names of farms were released. They say that OMAFRA's told them that 3% of farmers who responded to the survey agreed to have their farm name and business registration number released. So they're quite concerned about having that information, just kind of freely available to whoever wants to ask for it.
And so, just to sort of clarify this for my satisfaction, then, is this a done deal, or is there any appeal on this, or is this happening?
So we're still trying to figure that out. The province released a statement today in which they said that there is an appeal process, so I expect there will be some appeal. I am still seeking some clarification on how that's going to work, but within the Office of the Privacy Commissioner allows an appeal related to the Freedom of Information Act within 30 days of when a decision was made. So it looks like farmers will probably have 30 days to appeal it. Conversely, on the other side, the person who made the request could have 30 days to further appeal the decision that they can't get the farm business registration numbers. So it isn't over yet, but it's been a fairly fast-moving kind of story, and certainly something that's creating some concern.
So then, I guess the expectation would be that these farm groups who've expressed concern would launch the appeal on behalf of farmers. Is that sort of what you see or envision happening?
I don't know for sure. I'm sure they will be vocal on behalf of farmers, but my guess, the way government things run, that individuals will need to be the ones that make the appeal. So I'm guessing it will be individual farmers who will need to make the appeal, although we're still trying to figure that out for sure.
Well, thanks a lot, John. We'll definitely touch base with you as this story unfolds. I'm very curious about this.
It's been a curious story, and will continue to be. I think, Gord. So yeah, no problem, and take care.
All right, thank you. That was Farm Terrier editor John Gregg. You're listening to Between the Rows, the podcast of Glacier FarmMedia. I'm your host this week, Gord Gilmour. A bit later, Alexis Kinlan of the Alberta Farmer Express will tell us about the growing challenge of kochia control. And Phil Franz Workington of Markets Farm will bring us the latest on commodities. But first, here's AgCanada.com editor Dave Bedard to tell us about a surprise in the mailbox that's concerning agriculture regulators. Dave, thanks for taking the time to join us today.
My pleasure, Gord.
So, tell us a bit about what prompted this warning about the seeds. What were folks finding in their mailboxes?
Well, according to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, that's the APHIS, that's an arm of USDA in the States, what they've been finding is basically just packages that have been mailed out to people with specific addresses. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to where the packages are coming from, although a lot of them seem to be coming from China, some seem to be coming from Singapore. And what happens when people open these little envelopes, there's little tiny packets of seed, just random variable seed.
I'm not sure if I know what to do if I found that in my mailbox. So what do the authorities have to say about this then?
Well, what they've found is that just based on the reports that they've seen so far, what they're finding is that the seeds in question, at least according to CFIA anyway, the seeds in question seem to be pretty low risk. It's just basically almost sort of a seemingly random mixture of seeds. There's what APHIS described as a mixture of ornamental, fruit and vegetable, herb, and weed seeds of all things. CFIA is a bit more specific. They say what the seeds that they've seen so far appear to be tomato, rose, strawberry, citrus, and believe it or not, because I can't see anybody keeping these things around, a mixture of weed seeds that are fairly common in Canada, such as flickweed and shepherd's purse. Go figure. And that's so far that's all they know. They have no confirmation on who specifically is sending these seeds, and they've only got some speculation so far as to the why.
And what should people do if they get them then?
Well, both CFIA and APHIS are pretty much on the same page about this. First off, if you do get an envelope, you open it up, and there's a packet of seeds in there, don't open the packet. If you do open the packet, do not throw it out. If you did throw it out, well, there's not much you can do but try and save the envelope. Now, what they're really trying to keep people from doing is that they're trying to keep people from either planting or composting these seeds. What they want to do is they want to keep them from taking root. So if you have opened the package and you have planted the seeds, what they want you to do is basically take them out and put them in a plastic bag, put that plastic bag in another plastic bag, and do the same with the package, and seal them up and set them aside and report it to your local Canadian Food Inspection, or rather your regional Canadian Food Inspection Agency office. And there's a list of those phone numbers and contact information online. APHIS is a little more specific and a little more ruthless about it. They say if you did plant or compost the seeds, go get them. If any plants did take root or did start sprouting, they want you to dig them up and at least 3 inches of the surrounding soil as well. Put that in a plastic bag, put that plastic bag in another plastic bag, and set it aside for future collection by state or federal officials. If you did, they also don't recommend that people flush the seeds. If you did flush the seeds, there's not much you can do about it, unfortunately, but they really advise against it. Again, the whole idea is they really don't want whatever these seeds are to take root. The CFI has described it as fairly low risk, but we don't know that for sure yet.
So, is there anything nefarious going on here? What the heck is happening here? Do we have any idea?
Well, that's a bit of a mystery. APHIS in the States seems to so far have no evidence that people are trying to willfully do damage here. The term agro-terrorism has been bandied about, but there's no evidence that that's happening yet. The idea that there's somebody trying to distribute some rogue GMO or something like that, there's also no evidence of that yet. What we seem to be looking at so far is just some fairly lame garden variety seeds. However, the one thing that they keep coming back to is the idea that this is some sort of just an online e-marketplace scam, what's referred to as a brushing scam. Now, of course, I'd never heard of this before, and it seems like sort of a sad and pathetic way for people to get credibility in an online e-marketplace, or a legitimate online e-marketplace, rather, such as Amazon or what have you. Basically, what they're doing is you take a fairly worthless item, such as small packets of random seeds, if you happen to have them kicking around, get hold of an address list of some kind. In this case, somehow so far they seem to have gotten the addresses of about 750 people across Canada, across the 10 provinces in Canada. There's been no cases of this in the territories yet. APHIS has seen cases of this in at least 22 states. There's also been cases of people in the European Union or Australia receiving these seeds. The idea is, with a brushing scam, is that what somebody's trying to do is at least give the semblance of some sort of a legitimate delivery of an actual product. And what you've got then, you've got somebody's mailing address, and basically with a fake email address, what you then do is you get an email back confirming that the package has been delivered, and then you use that fake email address that's attached to a legitimate mailing address to give yourself a glowing fake review online, and that burnishes your reputation as a legitimate e-marketplace seller, which again is pretty sad and pathetic, but using the internet to sort of burnish one's reputation online in a sad and pathetic manner, that's pretty much on brand for a lot of people these days, unfortunately. That's only the speculation so far, but nobody else can think of any legitimate reason or sane reason why people would do this.
Sounds like pretty seedy business to me. I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. Well, thanks a lot, Dave. Thanks for taking the time to fill us in on this.
Pleasure's on mine, Gord. Take care.
That was Dave Bedard of agcanada.com telling us about what appears to be an internet scam. You're listening to Between the Rows, and I'm your host, Gord Gilmour. We'll be speaking soon to Phil Franz Workington of Market Farm for the latest on the markets. But first, here's Alberta Farmer Express reporter Alexis Kinlan. She joins us today to tell us about a particularly nasty weed and some of the latest research on how to control it. Alexis, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So in your article, weed specialists called kochia one of the most dangerous weeds on the prairies. What's earned it that dubious distinction?
Well, it's mostly because, there's several things. One of them is kochia is just very prolific. It emerges early and has about 20,000 to 30,000 seeds per plant, so it's got a lot of seeds that it can spread. It does well in saline soils, it does well in droughts, and it spreads over large areas by drying off and becoming a tumbleweed. So that was one thing that was kind of interesting when I was doing this story. I never thought that those tumbleweeds that I saw, were actually kochia, but that's what they are. So kochia also thrives in harsh conditions, and it can spread far and wide, and I think we'll get to this more. Its big thing is it's really good at developing resistance to herbicides.
Yeah, and now the Farming Smarter research organization, they've been tackling it. What can you tell us about their study?
Well, they're in the second year of a 2-year study. So Farming Smarter is a research organization based in Lethbridge, and they're conducting a 4-year study on 3 160-acre fields. So they're doing a study on the effectiveness of combining crop rotations and chemical rotations. So they're testing a bunch of different crops. The project, Farming Smarter's research group, is working with, in collaboration with Charles Geddes, a research scientist with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada in Lethbridge. I should also mention Louis Barda's name. He's the one who's really kind of heading up this kochia project on behalf of Farming Smarter. Anyway, so the team is characterizing each field for salinity, soil factors, nutrients, and topography, and using precision agricultural tools such as aerial images, salinity mapping, and then overlaying them all using GIS technology. So they're using a lot of technology and rotations just to determine how kochia flourishes and how we can combat it, farmers can combat it. So at this point, they've seeded 9 different crops into 9 different stubbles and are studying the kind of kochia pressure that develops in the crops.
And now, as you correctly divined, we're going to talk a little bit more about herbicide resistance in this weed. I understand, as you alluded to, that's a real problem. And can you tell us a bit about that and why it makes it such a challenge?
Well, that's kochia resistance is one of the big stories with this weed. Kochia has developed resistance to group 2 almost 30 years ago. So about 10 years ago, batches of kochia became able to tolerate glyphosate, which is a group 9, and those batches that were glyphosate resistant began to turn up in the States. So then there was a 2017 study in southern Alberta where they looked at different populations of kochia in field sampled, and they found that 50% of the kochia population sampled were also resistant to glyphosate. So it's becoming increasingly hard to find a sample or to find kochia that is not resistant to herbicides. So herbicides are only about 50% effective on killing kochia. And to make it even worse, in the same 2017 study, about 18% of kochia populations sampled were also resistant to group 4, which is dicamba. So 10% of those sampled were resistant to all 3 groups. So that means that herbicide could be failing as a tool that farmers could use.
So then what does that mean in terms of how farmers are going to tackle this problem?
Well, fortunately, and this is part of what Farming Smarter is researching, they have found some ways that they can tackle it. So they found that by bumping seeding rates might help because kochia doesn't do well when there's a lot of competition. So if you've got a lot of plants, the kochia can't really get in there. You've really got to look at the risk areas of your field. Make sure that you bump seeding rates there. Make sure that your drill is properly calibrated. Growing a salt-tolerant forage to compete with kochia. So a lot of the strategy is really about outcompeting the weed. Other things that can work are using cover crops and inter-row cultivations. In Australia, they've got quite a bit of experience with kochia, so they destroy seeds using a Harrington seed destructor or bowing and cutting a plant before it becomes mature. But with that, you should do a little research and make sure you're doing it properly, because one of the things that you don't want to do is get active, living seeds in the soil, because then you're just spreading the kochia.
And are there crops that are particularly vulnerable to this kochia challenge? Well,
Farming Smarter is only in the second year of the project, but they've already found a few things that could show which crops could be vulnerable. They found that there was quite a bit of kochia pressure following Roundup Ready 2 canola, so that tells you that there's some glyphosate risk and, possibly some glyphosate resistance developing. They also found that the corn plots on their site had more kochia because of rider row spacing. So, it's only the second year of a study, but they've got 2 more years planned, and their research is going to really help farmers develop ways to kind of fight this weed. So that's all they've found so far, but it looks to be a very interesting study with some findings that could really help farmers out.
Well, that's great. We'll be sure to talk to you as they get a little bit more experience on it and do an update at a later date. That was Alexis Kinlan of Alberta Farmer Express. This is Between the Rows, the podcast of Glacier FarmMedia. I'm your host this week, Gord Gilmour. Now, last but far from least, we're joined by Phil Franz Workington of Markets Farm, who'll be making sense of the markets for us. Phil, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So we've seen the crop year just wrap up, and canola exports are up despite the loss of key market China. Now, how did that happen?
Yeah, I guess the Canadian Grain Commission put out their numbers, and it was preliminary, but 10.1 million tons. That's up nearly a million on the year, and that was Chinese business was cut in half at least, but it was more than made up for with the increased sales to both Europe and the United Arab Emirates, and a lot of that business is they were buying our canola, processing it, and then much of the resulting canola oil was still ending up in China. So they didn't have a ban on canola oil, just the seed. So it's kind of a roundabout way that sort of filled in some gaps and ended up with increased export movement overall.
Right, almost water finding its own level.
Yeah.
So now, funds, they've been gaining new prominence in the market of late. What's fueling that? Yeah,
the charts had been looking very supportive for canola, and in the background, the fundamental, that good export demand was kind of fueling things on the one hand, and then the fund traders sort of pick up on that, and they adjust their positions accordingly. So over the past couple of weeks, the overall fund position has moved from a net short, meaning they're kind of bearish and betting that prices will go lower, to a net long position of about 20-some thousand contracts in canola, and that's the first time that they've been sitting in a net long, betting on higher prices since October 2018. So nearly 2 years, and the latest trade since those numbers were out may see that long position move back towards neutral territory. We'll see, but it is kind of noteworthy that the funds, or they're trading off charts primarily, are looking at higher prices from a technical standpoint in canola.
And is that psychologically important for the market?
Yeah, because it's I know someone told me once that fund position of 10,000 contracts is enough to move the market if they decide to get out or change it. And so right now the net long is like 25,000, and their total longs are in the 30,000. So that's well above that 10,000 threshold. So there's some big money players in the background that could influence things depending on what they decide to do with their positions. And it does create psychological support as prices kind of move higher than that snowball effect and all that.
Right. Now, awkwardly, shifting the page, there are some key USDA reports coming out right away as we're recording this. But unfortunately, because of our deadline, we won't know what they say. However, I'd just like you to talk a little bit about what the trade's watching there.
Yeah, the big things will be the soybean and corn yields in the States. It's kind of the first survey-based, more official estimates based off feet in the ground on their yields this year, and also we'll get a more detailed picture on acres. So on the acreage front, they have their Prevent Plant program, which is area left unseeded, and there's been some questions about how
much went into that this year and wasn't ceded to anything, partially due to the pandemic and if farmers stayed away from planting crops. So they'll be watching the acres and then also yields. And both corn and soybeans crop ratings have generally been fairly good this year. So general expectations are we're going to see some pretty big yields, and they'll be up from previous estimates. And any surprises if that narrative either fails to materialize or if the yields are even better than anyone expected, then that will swing the U.S. markets one way or the other, and that, of course, will filter its way into Canadian prices as well.
Now, as we discussed earlier, the crop year's just wrapped up, and that, of course, means harvest is on the horizon, or in fact, ongoing in some areas with cereals.
Yeah.
What's being watched there? What's on your mind as harvest commences?
Yeah, well, I guess it'll be the watching as sort of anecdotal yield numbers come in if there's anything that's standing out there, and the main thing will just be the weather conditions over the next month, and we don't want a repeat of some of our recent years of the bad harvest weather. So just be watching the weather, and hopefully there's a nice long clear window to get things off.
That's great. Thanks so much, Phil. That was Markets Farm's Phil Franz Workington filling us in on the latest from the commodity markets. And that's another edition of Between the Rows. I'm your host, Gord Gilmour, saying so long. We hope you'll join us again next time. And in the meantime, stay safe out there.
Between the Rows podcast is brought to you by Glacier FarmMedia and sponsored by FCC Ag Expert, Canada's #1 field and accounting software. Try it for free at agexpert.ca.
Hey, do you know what's new and improved? Ag Expert software.
What's that?
Ag Expert? It's field and accounting software designed for Canadian agriculture.
No, that's Sparkle Sound.
When I say Ag Expert?
Yeah, that.
Well, Ag Expert Field helps you manage your farm. And Ag Expert Accounting is the accounting software in Canadian agriculture. But it's so new and improved, it still has that sparkle to it.
Mm-hmm. Can I use it on my phone?
Of course, it's built for modern agriculture. Try it for free at agexpert.ca.